Hi, everybody, and welcome. It's Friday, so it must be Connetics USA weekly show, Onwards and Upwards, everything that a healthcare worker needs to know about coming to live and work in the United States. I am your host, Tanya.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Onwards and Upwards. It looks like Tanya's stream has gone out, so hopefully we'll get her back. But it is still 7 a.m. and it is Friday, which means it is the Onwards and Upwards show. My name is Danielle Chasen. My maiden name is actually Friedman. So for those of you who have been watching some of our previous shows, you'll know that I am Tanya's daughter. She speaks about me in a lot of her other shows about coming to America with her young children, and I am one of those young children. I've actually been with Connetics for about 2 years now, and I've started to host some of your shows, so you'll start seeing my face pop up. I'm very excited to be here with you all. I see some of the comments in the chat wishing Tanya a happy birthday. It was her birthday yesterday, so we had a nice time celebrating. Oh, there we go. She's back.
Hi, everybody. It's not even Friday the 13th, and I have a gremlin, an IT gremlin, a glitch. So I'm actually logging in from my phone right now. I'm not sure what is up, but I want to welcome everybody from around the world. And joining me is my daughter, Danielle. Very special to have Danielle on the show, Onwards and Upwards. And today's topic is immigration. So immigration is obviously a topic that's very dear to everybody's hearts because it is one of the most exciting, but also scary, frustrating, stressful ways that people come to America. So really important to be au fait about how the things work. And we are about to learn from the two experts, our dynamic duo, Mike and Chris, who are going to be joining us shortly. Welcome to the show, Mike and Chris.
Hey, Tanya. Did you notice I changed my firm name?
Oh, he's from Happy Birthday.
I do, Mike. Do you want to tell everybody about that?
Exactly. Yeah. I thought that was I would be helpful in that way.
You're so
it's
helpful,
a good
Mike.
reminder.
Yeah. Tell us about it, Mike.
Yeah. I think it was yesterday, right? Wasn't yesterday the big day?
It was. We had a nice
even though you look 20 years younger than Chris and I, we know that because Danielle's on here that's probably not accurate. So
probably very
Mike,
young.
It's called good lighting.
Oh, okay.
That's the answer. Good lighting.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much, everybody. I'm actually joining in from my phone, so I seem to be having a technical hitch, but I'm so grateful to have my trusted daughter, Danielle, on the show with me. So she's going to be taking the questions in the chat, and I have on my desk, as per usual, full of questions, immigration questions from our viewers around the world who are asking our experts legal immigration questions. So if you are interested in coming to the United States, please apply online to Connetics USA, and our team are on hand right now to speak to you and make your American dream a reality. And I wanted to just share with everybody before we get started that the 4th of July was this week, and that date is very, very dear to me because it's actually the day that I left South Africa 23 years ago and came to America. It was one of the most exciting chapters of my life, but also one of the most stressful and scary. And Onwards and Upwards is really my way of paying it forward to other immigrants and helping share information that I wish I had 23 years ago. And I also want to just share a picture of my beautiful granddaughter. Danielle gave me the gift of a granddaughter. She's wearing there her red, white, and blue on Independence Day. And this is what we want for everybody who's watching today, is the next generations of your family to be in the United States. And here I have my beautiful American granddaughter. So with that said, we're going to get right to it. And I'm going to start off with some of the questions. Danielle, you and I can alternate. And if you're joining us now, please apply online, and we're going to get started with the questions. Danielle's going to take the questions in the chat, and I'm going to take the questions that are all over my desk right now.
So let us know where you're watching from. I see a lot of people saying hello. Let us know where you're watching from. We want to know where you're from.
Danielle's going to read off, because I can't see it on my phone. So Danielle's going to read off the names of where you're watching from around the world. We love to see our viewers, and please share this show with everybody around the world. This is your way of paying it forward for your friends and colleagues as well. Okay, so first question comes from Reagan. Can an H-1 visa be converted into an EB-3 visa once you start working in the US? If yes, how soon can we switch the visa when we get there? Chris?
Yeah, so good news. It's pretty common for folks who have H-1B visas to file also for green cards. Theoretically, we can file it concurrently. We can file it essentially at the same time we file the H-1B visa. My experience is a lot of companies do like there to be an onboarding period, maybe 3 months, maybe 6 months before they move ahead with the green card. But legally speaking, it can happen immediately.
Okay. And then second part of that question, Chris, is from Reagan is, if I have a spouse, how long before my spouse will be able to work?
Yeah, so right now, so if we file the I-140, let's pick a date, 3 months after you come to the United States. If the I-140 is filed under premium processing, we'll get that approval in 15 days. And with that approval notice, we can file for the spouse's EAD. It's currently taking 4, 5, 6 months, something like that. So you put those timeline together and you get about 3 months in the beginning, another 15 days, and then another 4, 5, 6 months for the EAD to get approved. Good news, though, the USCIS has announced that they are expecting to allow EADs in this situation to be filed under premium processing. I'm hoping later this year, although I haven't seen a time frame on it. If that were to happen, we'd cut that 4, 5, 6 weeks down substantially. Currently, premium processing is 15 days, although I've heard some rumors that they may make this EAD 30 or 60-day premium processing, not 15 days. But anyway, for today, it's come in the United States, file the I-140. I-140 gets approved, file the EAD. The EAD takes 4, 5, 6 months, and then the spouse is eligible to work.
Okay, so that gives us a really good idea of when the spouse will be able to work, which is really important for many families who are looking for that financial stability of having 2 incomes. Thank you, Chris. Danielle?
Yes. So, Mike, I have a question for you. It's from Therese. Therese says, am I also affected with the retrogression if I'm already documentarily qualified by the NVC?
And the answer is yes. Everyone is affected by the retrogression in the priority date charts until you actually have your visa stamp, your green card issued, your immigrant visa issued. So whether you already have an interview scheduled or whether you're DQ'd or whether you're just filing, you are affected in the time frame. So in order to, once you're DQ'd, in order to have an interview and actually get your immigrant visa issued, you have to have a priority date earlier than the date on the chart, which currently we're talking, this is the July bulletin, the latest one that's out. And if you're from the rest of the world, it's February 1st, 2022. Philippines mirrors that for February 1st, 2022. So a date earlier than that, a filing date, a priority date, I-140 date, prior to February 1st, 2022, retrogression doesn't affect you. Anytime filed after February 1st, 2022, retrogression does affect you.
Okay.
Thanks for that clarification, Mike. So a follow-up question on the retrogression, and this is for Chris and for Mike. When retrogression first hit a few months ago, there was a lot of talk that we didn't anticipate any change until the new government fiscal year in September for the October visa bulletin. What changed? Why? A lot of people were surprised by what happened last month, where the visa bulletin went back even further. Can you give us your thoughts or comments on that? But this is to both of you.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the reality is this is an inexact science that the Department of State has. when the Department of State retrogresses dates backwards, which does happen as we experienced both again in April and then again in June, it essentially means that the State Department overestimated the amount of visas, employment-based visas, EB-3 visas, that they thought that they would have the remainder of the fiscal year. So essentially what they did is the Department of State, is they thought that the demand would be this high, but in fact the demand was this high. And so as a result of that, the State Department cannot exceed 140,000 employment-based visas. They can sort of not exceed about 40,000 EB-3 visas. And by retrogressing, they are signaling to the industry that they are receiving well in excess of what they expected. And so my guess would be, here we are in early July. We have, as Tanya was saying, about a little less than 3 months less than the fiscal year. My expectation would be we would not see any progression in the Philippine, worldwide, or for that matter, Indian and Chinese EB-3 dates. We might see it even retrogress some more. I wouldn't be terribly concerned about any future retrogression. That's essentially just the State Department saying that they've reached the cap for the fiscal year, and so therefore they're not legally allowed to approve any others. So that would be my expectation over the next 3 months. In mid-September, we should see, we will see an October visa bulletin. That October visa bulletin will allocate another 140,000 visas. It will allocate another 40,000 EB-3 visas. And so the expectation is that it will move forward from the current February 2022 date. As to how far forward, some of that is going to be dependent on the I-140s that the State Department and the USCIS receive this summer that have older priority dates, and those would be perm cases. It's important to note that for perm cases, which are not nursing cases and not physical therapy cases, but for other people listening in on this call, if you're a medical technologist, for instance, speech language pathologist, occupational therapist, et cetera, you go through a longer process called a perm process. And the I-140 is not your first stage in the process. It's actually your second stage in the process. So you do the perm and then you do the I-140. And the I-140, its priority date for these perm cases is actually backdated to the perm filing. And so the USCIS doesn't really have much insight into the backlog there. And so that lag in information is what causes this, sometimes these retrogressions, because the State Department doesn't anticipate the depth of some of the perm cases. All of which is a long way of saying, and I think this is the shortest way to take this, we would expect no progression the rest of this fiscal year for the next roughly 3 months. In mid-September, we will see the 2024 fiscal year, another 140,000 visas, another 40,000 EB-3 visas. We would expect some progression. As to how far that progression is, anyone who tells you what that answer is really, even the State Department doesn't know what that number is going to be. But we will all find out in September. And so that's the retrogression story here in early July 2023.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
and one thing I'd like to
go ahead, Mike.
add, if that's okay, Tanya, is summer retrogression is, we view it negatively because we're looking at our individual cases and we're looking at the date it is in front of us. But if we look at it from a big picture perspective, it's actually not signaling a bad thing. What it's signaling is that they are using up their allotment. So the government system for these immigrant visas is a use it or lose it program. So as Chris said, they've got roughly 140,000. If they don't use all up 140,000 by September 30th, whatever's left over is just wasted. So it doesn't carry over to the next year. So those are just lost. So when they retrogress things during the summer, or even they have a category they can put in called U, which means unavailable, it simply means they've used up all 140,000. So the process is efficient in the fact that their utilization is strong. So from a big picture, we want to use up all 140,000. It may not help your case, but it helps somebody's case somewhere. And so I think summer retrogression should not be viewed as negatively, and it certainly shouldn't be expected. If you've been on this call for the last couple months, I think Chris and I both have kind of talked about the expectation is we both predicted it would not move forward, and if anything, it will move backwards. And so we're all obviously all anxiously waiting till September to see what the October bulletin looks like.
Thank you for adding that, Mike. And I think that really, I know we've spoken about this on the show, but if you are joining us for the first time, I think that the main message is it's unpredictable. Nobody knows for sure, as was just explained. But for those people who are just starting out this journey, the process is the same. It just means that it's going to take a bit longer. It takes a long time. It's just going to take a bit longer. So if you are just getting started now, you haven't even passed your NCLEX yet, or you're a medtech, you haven't passed your ASCPI, go ahead and get started, because we have literally thousands and thousands of positions available in the United States right now. Employers are not slowing down at all. We are seeing an uptick of employers hiring international nurses as the nursing shortage grows in the United States. So now is your time. Don't wait, and don't be despondent about the retrogression, because there's still a massive opportunity here in the United States. Danielle, should we take some questions from the chat?
Yes, let's look over at the chat. We also have a lot of different countries being represented. We have Lee Ling from Trinidad and Tobago saying hello. We have Kirby watching from the Philippines, Mojada watching from Iran, Marsha, a Filipino from the UAE. So we are covering a lot of the world with our viewers. So hello to everybody. Let us know where you're watching from. And I am going to take some questions from the chat. So please feel free to post your questions. So I see a follow-up question. It's from Jake about retrogression. So I know a lot of our nurses are new to this process, are watching for the first time. But some of our nurses have been on this journey for quite some time. This question is for both Chris and Mike, and we'll go with Mike first this time. How is this retrogression different or similar to the retrogressions that we've seen in the past? Because obviously this is not a new thing for us.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that's different about it is that we have rarely seen retrogression that's affected the EB3 rest of the world to the extent that it has. And I think that's because there's a variety of occupations that during COVID and post-COVID that people started to sponsor international workers in, whether it was, unskilled labor, truck drivers, CNAs, all across the board that fell under that EB3 category. So I think that's one thing that's different on the negative side. On the positive side, the economy is strong. Depending on what news station you watch, could be stronger or not, but nonetheless, unemployment is extremely low. New numbers came out today, and we're, I think, 3.6%. As Tanya mentioned, the nursing shortage continues to grow here in the U.S. So the economy is strong, which means there's still buying going on. So hospitals are still recruiting. Hospitals are looking at this and saying, hey, we love the fact that we could get international RNs 8 to 10 months a year ago. Today, the time frame might be 18 to 24 months, but we still need international RNs. We're still going to have that need 18 months from now, 24 months from now. So there's a continued amount of hiring. And then the third thing that I think is significant is that there is a push on the legislative front from a variety of different sources that historically the individuals or the groups looking to deal with retrogression have been fairly narrow. They've been companies like Tanya's company, law firms like mine and Chris's, and a few hospitals. But now we've seen a lot of groundswell from hospitals just out of the blue in the newspapers. You'll hear about retrogression is affecting our hiring and our quality of care. And that's the kind of stuff that we didn't see any in the past. And all that together, I think, helps move us at least a little bit closer to potentially some sort of legislative relief. So I think those are the big things I would take away, that this is why this one's a little different than what we've had in the past.
Okay, interesting. Those are some interesting differences to note. Anything to add, Chris, or anything about the similarities?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing is it's actually not dissimilar from other retrogressions. I mean, the retrogression fundamentally is the same in all time, which is just that there is the State Department does not anticipate the demand being as high. But I would just echo what Mike said, which is I think the key takeaway is the U.S. demand for the nurses is extraordinary. And there are these legislative efforts that we are optimistic will be successful, but by no means are going to happen soon, or certainly or no means are guarantees. But, the arrows are all pointing in the right direction. And, one thing that I often say on these, Danielle, is to some degree, all of this is important. And I know it creates a lot of anxiety and people are very interested in timelines. On the other hand, none of this is actually very important, believe it or not. And the reason is because from the nurse's perspective, the situation is the same. You need to take your NCLEX. You need to pass your English exam. It would be great if we could get you in here in 9 months like we were doing in the last few years. But if instead of 9 months, it's 15 months or 18 months or even 24 months, Mike and I, and for that matter, Tanya and I, have been doing this for such a long time. We're here to tell you that extra time, while frustrating, and I'm certainly wish it wasn't that, in a few years, it's going to be, you're not even going to have considered it because you're going to be here in the United States. You're going to be working. By the vast majority of the folks who come in through AMN and Connetics have just wonderful experiences with their employers. And so I wouldn't get too focused on this retrogression. I understand many people were surprised in April, but again, it's just a lengthening of the time, and it's not lengthening of the time to 10 years or 12 years, like unfortunately it is for Indian natives. It's 6 months more or 9 months more. It's a very workable answer, and the demand for Philippine and other internationally trained nurses is just extraordinary in the United States. So that's the part that I think that's the most important message that I want to convey.
Thank you, Chris and Mike. Chris, do you want to add anything about the legislation? I know Mike touched on that there is a lot of initiatives right now. AMN International, Connetics are now part of AMN International. We're very proud to say. And I know that there are a lot of initiatives that we are involved in, that you guys are both involved in. Do you want to touch on that and give us if there are any exciting updates, Chris? We're hoping.
So, I mean, I think the most important piece of this is that we had a lot of success last term. We had 26, I think, senators who co-sponsored the legislation. That's out of 100. That's a very high number. And both Democrats and Republicans, I think, at a 50-50 ratio. Excuse me, on the House side, which is the lower house in the United States, we had about 60 or 70 congressmen, also bipartisan, a lot of Democrats, a lot of Republicans. We haven't announced new legislation yet this 2-year cycle. That's purposeful. Do not think that because the legislation has not been issued or published that it's not being worked on. It is actively being shopped. I've been in DC virtually every month of 2023. I will almost surely be heading there later this month. But there's a conscious effort happening. It's just not a public effort, and that's being consciously, there's a reason for that probably isn't worth getting into on this call, but suffice it to say, we are working in the background in terms of trying to guess when something would pass. I don't think anytime soon, but maybe, but I don't think anytime soon. But again, I think from the nurse's perspective, the focus probably should be, you want to get these updates for sure. It's important to know if the legislation happens, but whether it happens or not is probably something that you can't influence. And if the legislation happens positively, your case will surely be swept into it. There's no action you'll need to take on your side. And so I like to say, and it was something that was taught to me by Mike 25 years ago, let's control what we can control. And let's not get too worried. We want to keep an eye on it, but let's not get too worried on the things that we can't control.
I love that. Thank you. Let's control what we can control. So right now, what we can control is that there are jobs in America that you need to pass your NCLEX, you need to pass your English exam. If you're a medtech, you need to pass your ASCPI, and we can get you to America. And hopefully you'll be sharing your pictures of your American grandchildren like I did at the beginning of the show. And that's the American dream that we want for everybody who's watching. Danielle, let's take some questions from the chat.
Okay, so I see that Kim and Wary have a very, very similar question. So I'm just going to read Wary's question, but they're the same question. Both of these nurses would like to know, my PD is January 2023 and already on the DQ stage. Is it still practical or advisable to work in other English countries since my PD is not yet current? Mike, you want to take this one?
Yeah, I think this is kind of an important question as we're dealing with retrogression now, which is what do I do in the meantime? Whether it's, do I take a new job and move someplace else? Do I sign a 2-year contract, a 1-year contract, et cetera? By the way, Kim, I love your picture. That's a great photo. But I think you want to talk to your case manager, talk about how flexible the employer will be. If you're going to say sign a 1-year contract and your priority date becomes current in October, and you're going to then be interviewed in say November or December and eligible to come, but you're going to have signed a 1-year contract where you really wouldn't be able to come until next August. So you want to coordinate that with your case manager so that they know what your circumstances are, so they can talk to your facility and determine whether there's flexibility to allow that or whether that would be problematic. So I think that's part of it, is from a case manager perspective. The other thing that I think is important is you've got to look at how does that affect from an immigration perspective. We generally choose the consulate at the time of filing the I-140 as to where you're going to be interviewed. Changing consulates for interviews is incredibly difficult, not impossible, but generally doesn't go smoothly and can create delays. So we've got to say, are you taking your family with you? Are your family staying back home, wherever home happens to be? So there's a lot of factors there that are both personal as to what you want to do personally and how you want your career to go, but also dealing with your future position. So I think for some people, the answer is going to be, hey, it's going to work out fine. Go take that 1-year assignment, sign that renewal. For other people, maybe not so much, but I would work directly with your case manager and the attorney on your case to make sure it fits your circumstances. I think that's a great question.
Thank you, Mike. That's very helpful. I know that for many nurses, this is your life. You're trying to navigate how to manage the timelines when you have to resign and you've got family and you want to make sure that you are able to come to America, but also live your life while you're waiting. So good advice to speak to your case manager. Our case managers are very well trained to help you on an individual basis of what is the best decision for you right now. I have a question here from Sovik. Sovik is saying, hi, ma'am, I have one question. I'm a bachelor degree nurse from India who's passed my NCLEX. Can I apply for an H-1 visa and do nursing recruitment agencies? As a nursing recruitment agency, can you help me? Chris, what would you say to Sovik, who is an Indian nurse who has a bachelor's degree? I know typically in the past, nurses didn't come through on the H-1 visa, but we are seeing some changes in that regard with some clients.
Yeah, no, definitely. So the short answer is maybe, right? So there's essentially 2 pillars that are necessary in order to qualify a nurse for an H-1B visa. So the first pillar, it sounds like you meet, which is that you have to have a bachelor's degree in nursing. I think the questioner said that they had a BSN for the Indian national. So we're halfway there. The second half is the tougher half, which is, does the position in the United States require a bachelor's degree? And the reality is many nursing positions in the United States do not require a bachelor's degree, but that is gradually changing. We are seeing more and more hospitals require bachelor's degrees and other healthcare facilities. Even more maybe important, we were seeing more and more units within hospitals, certain units, certain floors, certain hospitals within health systems are requiring bachelor's degrees for a certain cohort of nurses, maybe not all of the nurses, but a certain cohort of nurses. And so what we're seeing at MSL Unkenholt, I suspect Mike's seeing it, Tanya's seeing it as well, and Danielle at the AMN and Connetics clients, we're seeing more and more of these health systems have units that are requiring bachelor's degrees. And so if you can find a hospital, health system, healthcare facility that either the system as a whole requires a bachelor's degree for nursing, or they have a unit within the health system that requires a bachelor's degree. In many instances, we can get H-1Bs for nurses approved. At our firm, just in the last 6 weeks, we've gotten, not quite 10 or so, but close to 10 H-1Bs approved for nurses. So we're seeing that more and more increase. The other thing I'd probably say about H-1B for nurses that I think is important, and it's a question that I've been seeing a lot in the last few months, is people are saying, well, why didn't we file H-1B for nurses in 2022 or in the first half of 2023? And the answer really comes down to the retrogression, which is if there was not a retrogression and we could bring in an EB3 nurse in about 7, 8, 9, 10 months, which is what we've seen for the last number of years, then there's no reason to explore some of these alternative approaches like the H-1B. But as the retrogression kicks in and we're seeing, instead of it being 7, 8, 9 months, turn into 15, 18, 24 months, the industry want to look to some of these alternative pathways that can bring nurses into the United States much quicker, because the demand for nursing in the United States is enormous. So that's, those I think are some of the key points about H-1Bs for nurses.
Okay, thank you, Chris. So Sobek, we do have some employers coming up that are sponsoring H1s for nurses. So stay tuned and more information about that to come. Over to you, Danielle.
Okay, so talking about H1s, I see a question in the chat from Nicole. Which is a better route for a med tech, the H1B or the EB3? Mike, you want to go ahead and take this one?
Sure. I think you've got to look at it from two different perspectives. There's no question that med tech positions qualify for an H1B. Obviously, the lottery is a factor as to what type of facility you're going to go to. If you're going to a cap-exempt facility that is a nonprofit affiliated with a university, they are allowed to file H-1Bs year-round, and so it makes the H-1B more attractive for a med tech. If you're going to a, say, for-profit facility, the H-1B would generally not be considered for a med tech, but could be, depending on the circumstances. The lottery odds are very low. Some of the factors you want to look at, and you've got to think about this from a perspective of what do you want to do and what does your employer want to do, and then that needs to match. One of the advantages for you in going the EB3, the green card route, is that your spouse, if you have a spouse, will be able to work immediately when they come in. And if you're a two-income family and you've got a spouse, that's really critical. Where with an H-1B, your spouse would not. And with a med tech, an H-1B that comes in still has to go through the perm process, which means your spouse is likely not working for 18 months to 2 years, maybe even a little longer. So that's a big factor. The other thing is with respect to what is your employer interested in doing. Employers often like the sure set route of doing the EB3s because they don't have to worry about the lottery or anything like that. There's some cost factors involved. So sometimes they may have a preference. And I generally try to encourage most of my clients who are nonprofit cap-exempt employers to go the H-1B route because the fact that, if you already have your ASCPI and your visa screen, then, I can have you here in about 10 weeks. And so that's significantly faster than 2.5 to 3 years. But there are some individuals who are like, no, that doesn't work for me and that doesn't work for my family. I think as retrogression or the perm processing times grow, and perm processing right now is very slow, I think that more people will move to the H-1B route in the medtech space.
Yeah, and we are seeing lots of medtechs come through to the United States. There's a big demand and we have lots of opportunities. So if you're a medtech, please go online right now and apply. And our allied recruiters are waiting to speak to you. We have positions all over the United States for medtechs. We have a question from Mabel. Mabel is saying, can you apply for multiple visa types at the same time? For instance, a student visa and an EB3 visa at the same time, Chris?
Yeah, no, almost surely you can. Having said that, the one thing to keep in mind when you're applying for a student visa, as a student visa is something that is called a non-immigrant visa. The green card, the EB3, is a immigrant visa. So you have a non-immigrant visa and an immigrant visa. And you have to make sure you're preparing those cases precisely. So you want to make sure you're talking to your attorney, because if you do them in the wrong order, you can get denied on the student visa. It can conceivably even cause headaches on your green card. By the way, none of that is true with the H-1B visa, which does not have something called an immigrant intent problem like the F-1 student visa does. So the short answer is it depends on the visas. But if you're applying for a student visa and you also want to apply for an EB3, just make sure everyone's aware of that when you're filing, when you're preparing your case. And it can be done, but it does. There just needs to be just a few things that are necessarily taken care of at the time of both of those cases filings.
Thank you, Chris. And Mabel, I would also suggest you or anyone who's interested, look at the Connetics USA website, because we have done shows previously on student visas. We've done shows on adjustment of status process, on the consular green card process, and you can see that on the Connetics USA website. And we also have guidebooks that give you a lot of the specific detail that Chris was speaking about, of how the different visas are different and what you need to know as a healthcare worker. Danielle?
All right, so let's take some more questions from the chat. So I see Simbaresh says, a friend has an approved I-140 with PD 8/20/21 with organization 1, but he's left to join another and has a new I-140 with PD 1/2023. How can she use the old PD from organization 1 to beat retrogression? So is this even possible? Mike, you want to go ahead and take this one?
Sure. So the first question I'd want to know is why that the old priority date, the old I-140, was not included with the new filing to recapture that priority date. Was it not disclosed to the organization or the law firm that was filing it? Or is there an issue with it? I-140 priority dates are retained and kind of owned, so to speak, by you, but they can be revoked if there was some prior fraud or misrepresentation, and then that priority date would no longer be valid. But assuming the priority date is the I-140 really was valid and it was simply you forgot to turn it over to the attorney or to the company that hired you, you should be able to recapture that date. The reality is getting them to recognize a old priority date with a new filing where it wasn't disclosed can be fairly difficult. And I would probably encourage my client, if this were my client, to simply file a new I-140 with the old information, and that'll be the fastest way.
Okay, thank you, Mike. And just one word of advice to healthcare workers around the world. We have seen some healthcare workers say, well, you know, with this retrogression, how do I, and the word was in that last question, how do I beat retrogression? Can't really beat retrogression. This is something that is, as Mike says, out of our control. So it really is important when you decide on employer And I'm not sure why the person has a different priority date in that particular question. But when you decide an employer, I always like to refer to it as like a marriage. You want to make sure that you are committed to that employer, because they are spending a lot of money to get you to the United States. And it's really important that you show that same commitment on your side. So I really encourage everybody to always think about that. There's the saying, do unto others as you would want done to you. So we don't want to be jumping around from one job to another where it's possible. We have a question here from, I've got so many questions here. I'm trying to pick one that hasn't been asked as yet. Hans is saying, does Connetics guide or support to temporary housing for us? So the answer, Hans, that's not an immigration question, but the answer is yes. Every Connetics employer has a nurse, what we call a healthcare worker package, and part of that will be temporary housing when you arrive. You also have what we call our circle of support, which is where we'll give you information about permanent housing in the area where you're going to be living as well. So just wanted to clear up that question. Ross has a question, Chris. Can a dependent go back to work in their home country to finish school a year after getting a green card?
Yes. Having said that, I assume they want to maintain their American green card, which is generally possible. So what you want to do is you want to reach out to your U.S. attorney a good 6 to 9 months in advance of when you intend to return back to your home country to go back to school. I think the writer asks. So it can be done. We may need to want to take some precautionary items through something called perhaps a reentry permit or an advanced parole, or not advanced parole, excuse me, a reentry permit. So it's possible, but you do want to give the lawyer a lot of leeway. You want to talk about, kind of what your timeline is, how long you plan on going back for, how often you plan on coming back to America. And the lawyer may suggest that you file an extra form or two just to make sure that your U.S. residency is preserved.
Okay, good advice.
All right, let's take another question from the chat. I see a lot of questions about spouses and about babies. I see Ornus says, what happens if I give birth after my I-140 has just been approved? What happens to Ornus? What can Ornus do? Mike, do you want to take this one?
It's pretty easy to add a child that's born after an I-140 is approved before the interview occurs. So that just let your case manager and your attorney know, and they can take care of the paperwork, but that generally does not create a problem at all.
Thank you, Mike. Maybeth has a question, and I'm going to take that question even though it's not an immigration question. Maybeth says, I'm 53. Am I able to work in the United States? And the answer, everybody on the panel, is?
Yeah.
I hope so, because I'm 53.
Yes.
Yeah. I was 53 and I was working when I was, so yes.
Me too, Mike. Maybeth, I'm 50. Yesterday I was 59 and here I am working. So no reason for you not to come to the United States. So apply online and we would love to see you working in the United States. Okay, next immigration question. Ella says, my friend wasn't able to declare her relatives for her DS-260. She was then given a tourist visa for 10 years. She hasn't used it. Will it possibly affect her application for DS-260? Chris?
I'm not sure I followed that question. Her friend, what was it again?
My friend, it's a bit unclear. My friend wasn't able to declare her relatives for, I think Ella's asking for her friend. So her friend wasn't able to declare her relatives for her DS-260, and then she was given, I think the question is she's got a tourist visa and she's not sure if there's information that wasn't on her tourist visa that's on her DS-260. Will that cause a problem?
Yeah, I think this is probably a question where certainly someone should get direct information with the friend. This is not something where you want to ask a friend and then have your friend ask it in a public forum like this, because it sounds like a very precise question. And I'm not sure what they mean by declare her relatives, and it would depend on what relatives. So I think this question is really one that the friend will want to reach out to their recruiter and or their lawyer. It's not, this probably isn't a good forum to answer that question.
Okay, thank you, Chris. So, Ella, get your friend to speak to her Connetics recruiter or a lawyer and get specifics so that you can get the correct information. And that's what we love about Onwards and Upwards, because this is a place for you not to hear something hear something via rumors, misinformation. This is from the real source. So thank you, Chris, for sharing that. Danielle?
Okay, so let's take another question from the chat. And if you have questions, reminder, put them in the chat. I'm taking questions. So we have a question from Paul. Due to the retrogression, can it be advisable to go with the H-1B and hope that your company sponsors an EB-3 visa later? Or is it not a guarantee for the EB-3 sponsorship once you arrive in the US with an H-1B visa? So kind of continuing on with that question about H-1Bs versus EB-3s. Chris, I see you shaking your head. Why don't you go ahead and take this one?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think this is something you want to talk with your recruiter before you do the H-1B process. My experience is most of the recruiters and U.S. employers, if they're bringing you on an H-1B, they actually have a plan in place to get your EB-3 as well. And so if your intention is to come to the United States, if you intend to come to the United States and you're coming on an H-1B, but you really would like to stay longer term and get a green card, that's absolutely possible. In fact, I think it's very common. I do think you want to talk to your recruiter and your employer just to understand what the timeline of that looks like, and how that works. In terms of the word guarantee, of course, is a funny word because nothing's guaranteed in life. But I think if you can get a plan in place, that you should feel comfortable.
Good advice. Mike, Chris has a question, and it's not Chris Musello, it's another Chris. Hi, good day. I have a question. How long after entering the US can me and my dependents receive the green card?
Well, typically the green card comes fairly quickly after arrival in the US. We rarely hear reports of anything taking more than 30 days. So, we often hear reports of a couple of weeks. So I would say, fairly quickly. Most individuals get their green card mailed to either the law firm's office or the hospital's office they're going to join, or, the AMN offices or somewhere like that. So I think it generally happens pretty fast. I haven't heard of any issues recently about green card delays after arrival. Chris, have you heard anything in your office?
No, in fact, it's been running pretty well, is in our experience. Yeah.
And I would concur, Chris. So don't worry about that. I think that you probably will get your green card very soon. And I can tell you, when you get that green card, there is just no better feeling as an immigrant, because it really is a massive, massive accomplishment. So hopefully you'll get yours soon. Danielle?
Okay, so I see My Dreams has asked this question a couple of times, and I'm actually curious about this. My Dreams says, how many green cards will be wasted this year? At the AILA conference, USCIS stated there were at 110,000. Can they complete all 197,000 before September 30th? Chris, do you want to go ahead and take this one?
Yeah, I was at that AILA conference actually, and I didn't hear them say that I guess the short answer is I don't expect there to be any wasted. I think, in fact, that's evidence of the retrogression is evidence of that, which is the reality is they are expecting to use the full allotment of employment-based visas this year. So my expectation would be the answer is 0, which wasn't the case for the last 2 or 3 fiscal years because of COVID, where at least on the family-based side, we as a country did underutilize the numbers. That actually helped the nurses because the overflow or the excess of unused family-based visas flowed over to the employment-based visas. But all that is very inside baseball. For most people, I wouldn't get overly concerned with any of this stuff, other than to say the expectation is that DOS and USCIS will almost surely use all of the visas this year.
Thank you, Chris. I'm looking at the time, so we're going to try and get in as many more questions as we can before we finish up. I have a question here from Vanjie. Vanjie is saying, if I plan to work as a nurse in the US and yet on process for my NCLEX, so I have not passed my NCLEX yet, and currently planning to apply for a tourist visa, will it affect my future application for EB3, Mike?
Applying for a tourist visa does not affect your application for an EB3. You can have tourist plans. You're going to come and go to Disney World, and that's perfectly fine. Obviously, if you already have an I-140 filed and your priority date is current, as Chris mentioned earlier, there's that concept of immigrant and non-immigrant intent, and there may be some question as to why you need a tourist visa if in fact you already have a priority date that's current and your intention has already been expressed that you're going to live here permanently in the U.S. But generally speaking, there's absolutely no conflict with having both a EB3 process, EB2, any type of immigrant visa process going on, and also having a tourist visa, and it's not uncommon.
Thank you, Mike. So Vanjie, you can scratch that one off your worry list. And please refer to the Connetics USA website with our success path. It gives you the detailed roadmap of how to come to the United States, step by step by step, and takes you through the process until you arrive and in the United States as a green card holder. So very clear and explicit step-by-step process that's on the Connetics USA website. Danielle?
Okay, so I see a lot of questions about children and about marriage, so I think we'll take another one. So Trudian wants to know, good morning, Trudian. If your visa is being processed and your dependent, a child, becomes 21 during that process, will that child be eligible to migrate with the rest of the family? Mike?
The concept is something called aging out. And a child needs to have their immigrant visa in hand before they turn 21 in order to be to obtain the green card. Now, there is this concept called Child Status Protection Act that's been around for a really long time that has a formula for calculating when your child turns 21, and it is different than their birthday. So it takes into consideration how many days the I-140 was pending and adds that to your child's birthday. So it's a little bit of a complicated test, but retrogression does not put a hold on your child's birthday. So your child could age out as a result of retrogression. So retrogression does not save. So if you have a child that's 18, 19, 20, kind of age, you want to make sure the case manager is aware of that. You want to make sure the attorney's aware of that. And you want to look at what is the plan? What's an alternative? Is my child in school? Maybe your child's better off applying for an F1 student visa and coming to the U.S. and looking at a variety of options. But if your child's already turned 21, then the child will not be included.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, moving on to the next question. We have a question here from May. May is saying, I am a medtech coming on an EB3 perm green card. My employer doesn't qualify for an H1 cap exemption. My question is, when they do advertising, if a medtech in the US applies, does that cancel my petition? Chris?
Probably not, but maybe. And the reason is it depends on how many medtechs the employer, the U.S. employer, is seeking to hire. Our experiences for a lot of U.S. employers, they almost have an unlimited need for medtechs. So, for instance, if we have an employer, and let's just pretend they have 10 open medtech positions, and they run a perm campaign here in the United States, which means they advertise and recruit U.S. workers, and one, or for that matter, 9 U.S. workers apply for the position. Because the employer has 10 open spots, it's actually totally fine. So the answer to your question is, it depends on how the case is prepared, but for most of our employers, this isn't a problem. But there's even probably a greater piece of comfort here, which is in the United States, essentially every U.S. medtech who's in the United States who wants a job has a job. And so we have a client of ours that, that they probably immigrate, I don't know, 300, 400, 500 med techs a year into the United States. And the reality is they run this perm campaign all the time, and they rarely even get a U.S. med tech who even applies for the position, because again, most U.S. med techs already have a job.
Yeah, very true, Chris. That's been our experience as well. And if you are a med tech and looking to come to the United States, we literally have hundreds of positions right now through both Connetics USA and O'Grady Payton, our sister company, both part of the AMN International family. So please go ahead and apply, and we'd be happy to help you. Danielle?
Okay, so I also see some questions in the chat about I-485 applications. So let's take one question. What happens to my pending I-485 application if my priority date becomes subject to retrogression? Mike, you want to go ahead and take that one?
Yeah, so if your 45 is already filed, which the question seems to indicate, then the retrogression will simply delay when your 45 can be adjudicated. Your EAD card that comes along with a 45 is not affected. The advanced parole document, which also comes with a 45, which is what allows you to travel internationally, is not impacted by retrogression. But your case will simply sit, so to speak, until such time as your priority date becomes current, and then they'll complete your adjudication, which will either mean they'll schedule a personal interview for you, or they'll waive the interview and simply issue the green card. So basically, retrogression simply means that you are stuck in limbo, but within that 45 process, you can renew your EAD if it needs to be renewed. You can renew your advanced parole if that needs to be renewed, but you're simply going to wait until the priority date becomes current. You have to be current when you file. You have to be current when they adjudicate it.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, last question from my side. Audrey saying, I am an adult over 21. My father, who was a US citizen, filed for me in 2021, but he is now deceased. I am presently in the US and out of status. Is there a chance that this will go through? Chris?
Probably not, unfortunately. Having said that, this is definitely one you want to talk to an attorney about. But based just on the short communication, my guess is probably not, but I would never want to give that kind of specific advice to someone like that in this kind of a forum.
Thank you, Chris. So Audrey, I would definitely suggest you check that out with an immigration lawyer and see the specifics of your case and how you might be affected. And hopefully you will have positive outcome. We're just not sure. Danielle, do you want to give the last question?
Okay, there's a lot of good questions in here. So let's go with Sova. Sova wants to know, if my priority date is just 17 days later than the final notice date, what's the possibility of getting called for a visa interview? Mike, you want to take this one?
So the priority date is not current, whether it's 17 days not current or 17 years not current. So you're not going to have an interview. However, I think most of us, we don't like to predict what the visa bulletin's going to do, but I think Chris and I both would put a little teeny bit of money on the fact that in October, your priority date's going to become current, which means you're likely going to be able to schedule an interview or get an interview shortly thereafter. But as of right now, they are not doing interviews prior to priority dates become current. That's a little different with 485s in the U.S. In the U.S., they will often have a 45 interview without a priority date current, but that's for different reasons. So, but I haven't seen any overseas.
Okay, thank you, Mike. So Sova, as we said, the process is the same. It's just going to take a little longer. So as they say, patience is a virtue, and hopefully you'll be in the United States soon. I cannot believe we are at the close of the hour. I've been holding up my cell phone. I'm getting very strong arm muscles here. So I apologize for the glitch at the beginning of the show. I'm not sure what's up with my computer this morning. But I wanted to thank our amazing panel, Chris and Mike, and my beautiful daughter, Danielle, for helping us today to navigate all of your questions. We got through as many as we could. Danielle, do you want to maybe take us through the upcoming shows and the Connetics initiatives?
Of course. For those viewers who are watching, you might see me on some of these shows. So on July 14th, we're going to have a direct hire versus staffing show. We're going to have our sister company at AMN, O'Grady Payton, on, and we're going to talk all about the differences between direct hire and staffing. On July 21st, we're going to have a client showcase, Arizona. July 28th, we're going to have the Equality, Diversity, and Inclusion show. Going into August, we have our Daisy Awards show on August 4th. August 11th, we're going to do another immigration Q&A. We're going to get an update, see if there's any changes. August 18th is going to be our Connetics Career Day. So this is your speed dating for Connetics employers that are going to be hiring. We have some very exciting employers, so make sure to tune into that show. August 25th, we have stateside, and we will see which state we are going to be featuring. And then we have the LaFora Talk Show, which is once a month. We have our July show on July 11th. So that's coming up, and the show is going to be working alongside preceptors. So make sure to check that out.
There's also the Connetics College.
The Connetics College, can't forget about the Connetics College. So every Monday at 6 a.m. Pacific, we have the Connetics College with a lot of our partners. We have classes with Aspire, Swoosh, iPass, and Niners. So make sure to check out our Connetics College shows. We also have our Connetics initiatives. So these are all of our programs for all of our nurses and med techs around the world. We have a free English scholarship. You saw that right, free. So for all of our nurses that come through Connetics, you get a free English review course. We have our $1,000 referral fee, which is now extended through August 31st. So if you have any friends with NCLEX, make sure to refer them on our website and avail yourself of that referral fee. We have a podcast, Nursing in America, our direct hire nurse aid program. So make sure to apply on our website, ConneticsUSA.com, for that. Our weekly Onwards and Upwards live show, we're watching that right now. Our Connetics College, and we also have allied needs. So we have talked about that a lot on this show. If you are a med tech, apply. We have literally hundreds of employers looking for med techs. All right.
Thank you, Danielle. Thank you, Danielle. So we're going to finish off there. Now I'm going to bring up again my picture of my beautiful granddaughter. This was her on the 4th of July. You can't see the white, but she was wearing red, white, and blue. As I said at the beginning of the show, I came to America, my family came to America on the 4th of July. It was Independence Day, very important day in our lives, and certainly was my independence as an immigrant, one of the most exciting but really difficult and stressful journeys. And this is what we want for every one of you, is to be able to see those generations of Americans being born in the United States, and all the sacrifices are worth it. So think of this little beautiful baby picture. For those of you who are around the world and are dreaming of coming to the United States, this is possible. Pay it forward to everyone. Share the show with all your friends and colleagues, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Onwards and upwards, everybody. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everybody.